Yeah, so I'm here to talk. I'm here from the comms working group. I want to talk about right now in comms, we're reconfiguring branding. So this is some initial ideation. Next slide, please. So if you aren't aware, our mission statement, you can read it there. But with branding, we wanted to take our mission statement and really condense it down into its essentials and then use those as like inspiration for visuals. So the abbreviated version that I kind of narrowed it down to was building a world that puts people first, and people and our well-being as like the central thought around that. Next. We also, in creating a brand, are thinking about our audience and their needs and values. Colleen, I think it's jumping around. Would you mind going back one? Oh, thank you. Yeah, so the three groups that I kind of identified as our biggest audiences were, general Americans, voters that are perhaps disengaged, frustrated, angry with the current system, and want transparency, fairness, and change, but don't know how to get that. Also identified a group which is progressives. So if you think about, burners, people who've supported AOC, or in general progressive policies, UBI is certainly a progressive policy, and I think we overlap a lot with that group. This group is, in general, pro-socialist ideas or progressive ideas, and to this group, generally, identity is very important. The idea of individuality and freedom. And then the third group, of course, is the Yang Yang, or the Humanity First movement, which is a very diverse political group. So not just progressives by any means, but like independents, other parties, really anyone. But a lot of us feel like outsiders, or feel like we haven't necessarily had a place to fit politically before, or weren't happy with the current two-party system. Obviously, we're all about math because we're the Yang Gang, so we love numbers, research-based solutions, etc. And of course, we're putting humanity first. So putting people at the center of things and wanting to highlight people's humanity and be compassionate. Next slide, please. So the brand voice, haven't gotten super far with this in terms of development, but obviously we want it to be honest, forward-thinking, welcoming, and accessible, meaning like not quite so much jargon or slang that can be confusing to new people. We want to make sure that the voice we're speaking with through emails or image captions, whatever it is really welcoming and really straightforward, right? Like compassionate. Next slide. So the general needs of the branding I broke down as well. On the right there, you can see the Yang Gang values. Like way back in the campaign, this is what the campaign put out for like their 6 core values that they wanted volunteers to live by. So those are humanity first, integrity, transparency, abundance, which is not having a mindset of scarcity, living the opposite way, grace and forgiveness, not left, not right, forward, which I think everyone has said, and the branding also needs to be nonpartisan and inclusive, because again, we're appealing to a very wide range of people, not just Democrats or Republicans, or even people who are necessarily already involved in politics and have like chosen a side. Also, we don't want it to be overtly political, because of course we do engage in a lot of political activity, but there are people that I think humanity first is also a lifestyle and how you communicate with people, and like presenting like a unifying culture instead of a divisive culture. We also, of course, want to emphasize our values and emphasize like a sense of life and humanity, because humans first. Also, we need to have a slightly different branding from Humanity Forward, which is Andrew's organization, whereas we are Humanity First movement, which is a slightly separate organization. Of course, a lot of overlap there in terms of volunteers, but we are different, and that is important. Next slide, please. And so this, getting into more of the visuals, I'm looking at, or the comms group is looking at header and body fonts. You can see some bold, action-oriented header fonts. They look a little boring here, but they do perhaps need to be quite readable. And then body fonts on the right, so thinking of a serif or a sans serif here, something that's very human and readable, but that doesn't scream math and like textbook, if you know what I mean. Next slide, please. And then this is kind of a couple of the color schemes we were looking at. We actually, during the last meeting where I presented this, we decided to go with color scheme number 2. It has a dark blue and an indigo, and then some really hot red, or like a red-orange kind of hot color, and then like a salmon color. So these colors, most all the color schemes included a blue, which is very stable, neutral, and technical, and then a warm color to complement that, to kind of like a bright contrast, and something that's more warm and human. And then here's some imagery that we might use in association with like our graphics. So if you've seen graphics online, right, for like events, for like phone banking parties, or like Humanity First Day, for example, we had an image for earlier that will be shared on social media. We're going to use some images such as like stock imagery, or imagery that we take at our own rallies, at our own events and things like that. Next slide. Now I'm going to go through a couple of visual elements that I think will end up being used. So for one is lines and arrows, right? Directionality, individuality, coming together, moving forward, right? Something we want to emphasize. Next, gradients, I think if used in a certain way can really evoke energy, power, acceptance, right? Like we're not putting ourselves in clear boxes. We're kind of defying edges and boundaries. I kind of like that. Next slide. Another thing, graphically, we want to imply movement. And I think that can be done through repetition and variation. So, right, we are a movement, but we want to make change, and we want to emphasize that graphically. We don't want things to feel static and unmoving. Next. And then, of course, we're about putting humans first. So fingerprints and hands, things that are kind of unique to people. Fingerprint is symbolic of, you know, one's personal individual identity, and hands also evoke connection, community, and getting work done. And then waves. So, you know, when we, I don't know if you've heard the, like, we're going to bring the wave, or like the wave is going to crash on Washington, right? Like we're bringing the wave. Is kind of a slang term that the Yanking have used for a while. And the idea of having waves, I think Yenny also mentioned in a comment, like a wave is like a really strong force. It's unstoppable, it's inevitable. And it, I don't know, could be a really good metaphor for a movement. Also, visual imagery of mountains. So implying stability, building up towards something, something that's like long-standing and foundational. And I think UBI is something that's very foundational. So there's something very powerful about mountain imagery. I think that's all of the symbols, but basically using all that imagery, picking and choosing imagery that we like for ourselves, and then testing out what works best with our color schemes and our fonts, and coming up with something that's kind of cohesive and that will help brand the movement, because it's very important to have like a cohesive professional brand. I know that it sounds kind of silly and decorative, but it really does matter to people when they see something, the colors and the fonts, like their first impression is meaningful. And if we can engage them in that first impression instead of like they just keep scrolling past it, you know, that's a potential to gather far more volunteers, right? And get people's attention. So branding can actually be very important. Next slide is what this branding is going to be applied to. So the final deliverables for this kind of branding project that we're doing is a brand guideline document that will have fonts, colors, examples of how to use all these things, like sample imagery, etc. Of course, we'll probably make tweaks to our website to reflect color schemes and fonts. We will make Canva templates. So Canva is like an online poster making service. So you don't have to have Photoshop, you don't have to have any of these fancy softwares. You just click the link and you can go in and like fill some text in and move things around to make it your own. And we'll have those Canva templates for like pamphlets, printable, social media event images, endorsement images, as we need them. Anything that's going to go on social media, like icons and header images and YouTube video thumbnails. So yeah, that's our branding project. I hope you all like it. If you're super interested in fonts and colors and whatnot, please head over to the comms channel or the comms _ branding channel. It's like a sub channel under the comms channel to see more about it and give your feedback. Thanks.
That's right.